With increasing effects of climate change, there is an urgent need to obtain energy from clean renewable sources. Energy from marine sources is relatively unexplored in comparison to land and carbon-based methods. The development of wind, wave and tidal energy are expected to increase, with offshore wind energy leading the way. There are 6,026 wind turbines in the UK, 20% of which are built offshore. 4,049 megawatts of energy each year are produced from offshore wind farms. This is enough to power 2 million homes in the UK. By 2020, the UK government aims for 8 to 10% of the country's annual electricity to be sourced from offshore wind farms.
This one is massive, over 300 turbines. Power is probably about 1 million houses, and that could actually be about 40% of the energy required for Scotland in a very good window. What we were particularly looking at was seabirds and using GPS trackers on kittiwakes, razorbills, guillemots and fulmars to look to see whether their movement and foraging patterns or foraging areas overlapped with their proposed the area of the wind farm. Kittiwakes were the only ones that really overlapped a lot.
They're trying to construct a wind farm in the mouth of the Firth of Forth in Scotland, and it's close to the largest gannet population in the world. That's 75,000 breeding pairs of gannets. And gannets are quite prone to collision. If you have a wind farm which is lying between the nesting location and their foraging grounds with no other way to turn, which is kind of what they're proposing, then that is just craziness. A lot of species will avoid turbines.
A collection of studies in the USA were analysed and found that up to 50% of annual avian death were caused by collisions with buildings and windows, up to 30% by collision with vehicles, up to 2% with communication towers, and only 0.02% were as a result of collision with wind turbines. Pile driving creates significant amounts of noise which causes trauma and displacement of marine organisms. 400 metres away from pile driving, the level of sound pressure is 189 decibels. This would cause a temporary or permanent threshold shift in the hearing of seals. Operational noise can be heard by harbour porpoises at 100 metres and harbour seals at over 1 kilometre. Inga et al. Proposed that displacement efforts were only temporary and organisms would return to the site 6 weeks after the initial installation had ended.
If you alter the structure of the base of a turbine, for example by drilling holes into it and creating kind of habitat mosaics, that can promote biodiversity, and then therefore these can act as artificial reefs or fish aggregating devices. But that in itself could potentially have it might have some positive effects, but also could have some negative effects.
Electromagnetic fields is something that really we know very little about. Sharks, for example, they're very sensitive to that type of stuff. It could end up being a non-fishing zone. That could be great, but then you're displacing fisheries.
Offshore wind farm energy is a relatively new technology, so it is very difficult to predict what might happen to the ecosystem, especially during different phases of operation. Monitoring of installed turbines will hopefully shed light on how these structures impact the surrounding environment.